Hello and welcome to Autistic Radio on Sunday, sponsored by coldpack.co.uk. If you use their website to buy your cold pack or a clinic supply of cold packs, we benefit here. Hi Harry, are we ready for the 555 Spectrum Voices?
Yes, we are. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Jules. This is Harry's Facebook for Sunday, the 18th of January 2026. And this is where we go through the posts that are shared on the autisticradio.com Facebook page. And the first post this evening is from Flourish with Neurodiversity, who's a coach helping you flourish and thrive, not just survive. Neurodiversity coaching and services, ADHD, AUDHD and Tourette's, adults and children, sensory wellness, work school, PIP, DLA support, dyslexia assessments, training and resources. And I've shared the following. If you are neurodivergent, you may experience a delayed reaction to large events or things that push you outside of your comfort zone and window of tolerance. Sometimes the reaction doesn't come during the thing, it comes after. You get through the event, the meeting, the appointment, the social time, the performance, and it even goes very well. Then, later, your nervous system crashes. This is especially common for autistic, ADHD, Tourette's, and other neurodivergent people. While you're in it, adrenaline carries you. You focus, mask, regulate, push through anxiety and sensory load. When it's over, the body finally feels safe enough to release. That release can look like deep exhaustion, increased tics or stimming, emotional shutdown or overwhelm, needing quiet, stillness, or withdrawal. None of this means it went badly. Often it happens because it mattered. A few gentle ways to support your nervous system afterward. Reduce sensory input, like dim lights, quiet, familiar textures. Let tics and stims happen without managing them. Hydrate and eat something grounding. Hydrate and eat something grounding. Avoid replaying or analysing the event. That can wait until your brain has capacity. Rest without needing to justify it. Even if this is active rest, still requiring some level of stimulation, such as something creative to help with the transition. You can be proud and depleted. Success doesn't cancel out nervous system cost. If you have an aftermath, this is normal and signs your body and nervous system need rest and recovery. This is something I'm experiencing today after doing something out of my comfort zone. It was incredibly rewarding, but equally heightened my nervous system. Spending time with my dog, comfy tracksuit, hood up, low lighting, and quiet help. Spending time with my dog, comfy tracksuit, hood up, low lighting, and quiet help my nervous system settle. For bespoke personalised support, we offer a 20-minute free discovery call to help identify how we can help you. We also offer free access to work application support, and offer free resources, groups, and peer connection through our Flourish with Neurodivergence Hub. And it ends with links to the support they're referring to. What helps you reset and regulate after a triggering event or situation? What's other people's thoughts?
I like the idea of active rest.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there, Ray. It's almost planning it as well, knowing how you're going to feel and having a strategy, in my mind, is a way of reducing some of the anxiety of the event and also reducing some of the effects of the event, because I know afterwards I'm going to have this active rest.
Have you always known that, Jules? And the reason I ask is that I was so recently diagnosed, but I now realize there were things I would do. And also my daughter, who is neurodivergent in one of these ways, used to sort of model it, you know. She called it chilling, but she had specific ways of doing it and continues to today.
I don't want to speak in absolutes, but I feel that my experience of being diagnosed wasn't the enormous revelation that it has been described by other people. I don't feel as though learning about my autism has, to the same extent other people describe, given me keys to my life. It's given me context, but I'm not doing an enormous amount different now to what I did before. I just have ways of describing it. However, I don't have a control. There's not a twin. So maybe it's just not noticeable to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I practically have a twin. I have a sister 1 year different in age. And even this week, we were talking about some of the things that she did to support me. And they just came intuitively to her.
I think also, if you take my daughter's experience, she was brought up by two neurodivergent parents who were very actively parenting. We weren't entirely busy with our own lives and careers. We prioritised that part of our life, even as young people. So she would say her experience as a youngster was very much formed by particularly her mum getting her and knowing her without having to think it round, because there are so many similarities that in me to my daughter that my wife could then relate to in her, but also in my daughter to my wife, so she could relate to it. It's just been a very fortunate situation that way.
Earlier we were talking about, overthink, which is like prior to the event. This seems to be talking about a situation where you're okay getting there, although it's out of your comfort zone. But there's no insistence here on overthink or prior anxiety. So it's getting there and then the aftermath. So the subject here, as I'm assuming, is the aftermath and not what we were talking about earlier, which is like a prior kind of anxiety. So come down from that, in that aftermath is you can't force yourself to relax, which is why I was impressed by the mention there of active rest. You know, if it's 6:30, you can't force yourself to go to bed. You may just want to like just distract yourself with something creative to tune out your body, to just get into a kind of zone. But yeah, I wonder what others think.
I think you're right, Ray. There's this thing that I've tried, do it for 5 or 10 minutes. I might get the name wrong, but is it called Nidra or Nidra yoga? You're awake, but if you practice it, it's not meditation and it's kind of not yoga, but it's like this in between thing. But if you can't do it, I would say a bath or your thing of choice, like just saying, in my house when the kids were growing up, I just, if it had been a big day for everybody, I just say to these two small children, there will be no more talking today. We've used up all the time.
In the text, Robbie says, I knew I was autistic more than 20 years before I was diagnosed. Jules says, the word performance jumps out at me. And Robbie also says, I don't rest doing nothing. I would do something like listening to music or play music. And, while reading that, about the rest kind of period, the sort of come down in the rest period after, the, the performance or masking or coping or basically just doing, and then, full of energy, and then full blast, doing what you want to do, getting through something, whatever, and then coming to the period of rest where it's difficult just to stop and do nothing, unless it's total exhaustion on my part, which would be sleep or at least doze. But I do identify with what some of the things it was said in terms of doing something isn't too, you're not over, it's not too overburdening, it's something that comes natural, like something creative. It's been talked about, like arts in terms of playing music, writing, drawing, painting, and other creative sort of methods that can be done, singing. And that's a great way to kind of relax and calm down from all that, energized experience in terms of you're tired, but you're doing something at your own pace afterward. And it's not, basically what I'm saying is doing nothing's very difficult unless you're exhausted. But if you find a thing that I certainly do, which is basically listening to music and type things rather than write, but doing something that's quite, it kind of tides you over, is more easier than just doing nothing. I mean, there has been that instance where I've been busy, and what I do is I sit and I kind of stare into space for maybe 10, 15 minutes. But I think that's when things have been quite overwhelming in terms of the senses. Like you've spoke to a lot of people, you've listened to a lot of people, there's been a lot of lights, a lot of sounds, smells, whatever. Even being away from home, so unfamiliar location, which you're not used to, out your comfort zone. So yeah, I kind of identify with quite a lot what's been shared and talked about.
It feels that what's being described here is a concentrated performance. Some might call it masking, some might call it performance, because that's often what it is. Musicians talk about the after gig routine, the thing that they need to do to distract them. Unfortunately, for many of them, it's drugs and alcohol and other things, but some have other ways of distracting or putting their mind onto something else so that they are fully engaged in a gentle way that doesn't have the same issues and feelings of what they've just done, to stop us going through the running through your mind over what could have been better at what you've just done, that piece of work or that meeting, whatever.
Yeah, it takes time to actually train yourself to do that, because that's a habit I used to get into in the past when I went to meetings and events, and I feel like I didn't speak properly in terms of describing something or talking about something or even showing something on a screen. But what relaxed me over time is I looked at other people and how they did it, and people that were so-called experts and what they did. And basically opened up to showing, the human side of people, no matter how much of an expert or, the master of their field that they are. They speak with, they repeat like with ums and ahs, and, they sometimes say something and make a mistake, and sometimes I slur their words, and I'm going, wait a minute, I've been giving myself such a rough time about not being perfect, about talking and saying something in certain places. And then I'm saying, well, other people do the same, and they make a joke of it, or they correct themselves and get on with it. So it relaxed me to an extent for me not to overthink that myself. Of course, if I feel there's been a catastrophe or something, it's harder to do. But I certainly feel these days, particularly doing it in the radio and doing this live as well, is not to think too much about mistakes or being perfect at what you're doing or how you're talking, because being authentic and human is enough. So that helps a lot and helps me relax and be satisfied of my day's work.
That is very nice to say. And then at the same time, this poster, they are saying to even be careful with yourself afterward if it was a resounding success. I wonder if there's this in between where it's less exhausting.
Yeah, kind of on a similar vein. I'm thinking, there's moments when the experience itself is the release. You don't have the release afterwards. It's just participating and encountering the event that was so high pressured is, in a sense, a release. Getting on with it and doing it and experiencing it. Again, it's that prior afterwards kind of syndrome. There was something else in this text, but I'm in the wrong window for scrolling. That there was a word they used, but I'll come back to it later.
I don't feel that there ever is a middle ground. There's the two extremes, and even if somebody says yes, there is a release because something went well and it's done, there is still the exhaustion. There might not be enormous amounts of anxiety, but there's still a need for self-care. My wife sees me come away from things, and she knows that immediately after I need to shake it out say a few things, probably do a lot of swearing about the bastards. And then she will say, is that out? And we might laugh, and then we will find an active way of doing something else, even if it's just an active way of watching a television program together, or eating a meal or something. Robbie might listen to music or play music.
It's almost like any journey, you've got to know how to land. You've got to, re-entry, as they used to say back in the day. It's when you come back, you've got to learn how to land. Yep.
Yeah, Tracer comes up with a good point in the comments. Swearing is good that way as it's stimming. And yes, some people or politicians or anyone have addictive behaviour after a hard day. So it's just finding that thing that suits to wind down. And your comment about no middle ground, because when the middle ground was getting discussed or just thrown in there, I'm thinking middle ground. Because I can only think of two scenarios. Ones where I'm very happy and I'm buzzing and, you know, in a great mood, and other ones where I'm totally raging. And but either way, I always need some rest, no matter how good or how bad it was. There has to be that rest and a way of resting. Although the difference is if it's been a bad time, I tend to sleep it off, and if it's a good thing, it's like I sit and celebrate, having a cup of tea or even a can of beer or whatever. Just depending on where I am and what it is I've done, but definitely somewhere that is quiet.
This is making me think about, the previous diagnoses before, say, even Asperger's. I'm thinking about my late cousin here and like all these diagnoses of things like bipolar or manic depressive, the swinging from emotional extremes. The interpretations now seem a wee bit more, I don't know, friendlier.
I think you're drifting into the zone of misdiagnosis and the different labels that have been put on people. We only have to speak to Lucy, who for many years has described for herself here on Autistic Radio that for many years she had a lot of very dangerous labels placed upon her, and also the medications and the restraint and the incarceration to go with them. And for her autism diagnosis was something that released her from those labels, I think she would say for herself.
The next post is from Nell Harris, easily inspired, who's an artist and a neuro-affirming advocate, author, illustrator of Neurodiversity Without Their Terminology series, AUDHD, based in Australia, and shared the following. The first 2 pages of my new book, called My Tasks Feel Like Mountains, which is now available for pre-order. Because this book isn't having a book launch event, autoimmune got my spoons too low. I wanted to do something special and launch something with it in a different way, where you can get the first part of it for free with this new piece of my soul. Story. I've been working on this plan since September last year, so it's pretty special to my heart. So it shows the first page of Nell's book, cartoon drawing. And it says, and it shows mountains, climbing up mountains. Tasks and chores can seem like mountains, some feeling impossible or too tough to climb. And it continues, that feeling can happen even when the task isn't hard or that it wouldn't take much time. What's people's thoughts?
You really have to see the illustration. It is very effective, you know. It's beautiful. I guess first I wondered, is this for children? But then when you're zooming in on the pictures, I like the close-ups of the illustration. It's for anybody. And the sky.
Just to add
So
to the conversation, it's Task Paralysis, children's book, Australian author, neuroaffirming, neurodivergent.
Can you imagine if these things were available to children when you were young? By you, I just mean anybody not a child now.
that's quite a thought, Teresa. I often think that. And in isolation, how would that kind of book exist in that world we were a part of when we were young? Because everything else would not have changed, but this piece of information would come in. A wee bit like some kind of like secret kind of literature.
It just made me think Jack and Jill ran up the hill to fetch a pail of water. And Jack fell down and broke his crown.
I'm thinking of the parent reading it to their autistic kid or neurodivergent kid and then reading it also for themselves. A little bit like they have this well-known, well-regarded Bluey children's program that really is a family program and helps the parents to think about their role in child rearing as well.
What I like
Yeah.
about it is it describes certain things so well, like the task in hand, which is supposedly an easy task according to whoever, society or the authority or whoever, and you're struggling with it. And if you're struggling with it as like a child, you're looked upon as someone that isn't trying, and being told that you're not trying hard enough, or you're not concentrating enough, or you're too busy daydreaming and being silly, which is a daft thing to say to children at times. There's this thing about compliance, as Robbie says a lot, and discipline. So I can relate to just seeing those words and even those pictures about mountains and actually, identify with that. The way I looked at it, rather than mountains, it was more like hills, but maybe mountains is actually more, precise, just depending what it is you're dealing with.
It's a classic anxiety dream, Is the climbing of a mountain, especially one that steep.
Robbie says that when he was young, he was considered a naughty child. Lots of tasks are difficult when he's depressed, because of lack of motivation and lack of energy. It takes him over. And he reminds people that what is easy for one person might be difficult for another. The only thing I've put down there is to say that depression is really tough, Robbie.
Also, the word motivation makes you feel, I, I don't know, energy seems really good when people talk about motivation. Not you talking about it, Robbie, but the world. It makes you feel like you have to be motivated, but you can't be, and that's okay.
It's like varying concepts of achievement, isn't it? As Robbie's just said in text, often things are demands set by society.
Yes, and that's what depresses you. I mean, I've been feeling quite down recently, quite energy zapped, and my motivation has been really sort of, what's going on here, and I'm been really frustrated. And even though it's not as bad as it was at one time, it did remind me when I was in school and going through depression and stress, and the motivation just to get up in the morning to go to school and that environment at that time. And this is before the diagnosis, so at the time it's just that I wasn't sure where I was in the world. It's just like, you just felt like this fool. And sometimes that sort of feeling would be released a little bit in terms of relieved. That feeling would be relieved a little bit because I had a circle of friends and we all kind of said silly things. Let's see the humour thing. The humour and then it'd be a laugh and then it'd be a wee relief from it. But then it'd be back to reality, getting into a classroom or travelling to school even and going through all these things. And it's all demands. It's all you must do, you must do. You must do this by this age or you must do this way. And if you look so obviously different, you're a problem. And problem is being polite about it. So, and that's when it does feel like mountains, I suppose.
It really does. And Jules was saying it's helpful if a parent is reading this to a child. It'd be helpful if it was in the school library too. Or, you know what I mean.
Ray said in the text, core wound being reactivated.
That's a wee phrase I use to myself sometimes when I feel like what you were feeling there, that Harry, something from your past seems to be happening again, and yet you're not in the same situation, but you're thinking, why am I feeling like I felt when I was like a teenager? And sometimes it's like some of the core wounds are like, things that hurt us the most or had the most impact are at formative times, like when we're at that age, like adolescence, say, or even younger, and they can recur later on. It just needs a certain set of situations and factors, to let it come to the fore. A wee bit like, sort of like, when, a spot erupts on your body or something like that without getting too gross. But yeah.
The next post. Sorry, anybody speak?
No, I was just going to say there, it's officially declared that the middle well, the middle of January, though, I think it's specifically the 13th is the most depressing day of the year.
Yeah, is it Blue Monday? Is that tomorrow? You know, it's the 19th. Yeah, I do that. Remember that being referred to. It's like the middle of January. Or is it just Blue January?
No, it's sometime around between the dates, the 13th and the 23rd. So maybe it's the third Monday. It 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 must be true. I believe it's true.
The next post is from Jens Den, a sanctuary for neurodivergent well-being, a page, health and wellness website, environmental conservation organisation, a sanctuary of understanding, a bridge between self-discovery and connection. And they share the following. Visibility and balance. I think it's incredibly important for autistic and otherwise neurodivergent people, children, young people, and adults to see other neurodivergent people visible in their own communities. Running businesses, holding platforms, being listened to, being trusted for our insight. Too often, autistic people grow up only seeing non-autistic people positioned as the helpers, the experts, the ones with authority. That imbalance quietly teaches autistic kids that support always comes from elsewhere, never from within their own community. Only around 22% of autistic people are in employment. And it isn't because autistic people lack ability. It's because environments, systems, and expectations aren't built with us in mind. Visibility matters because it changes what feels possible. That's one of the reasons I started Jens Den, Sanctuary for Neurodivergent Wellbeing, to create an autistic-led space where neurodivergent people can see themselves reflected with dignity, capability, and pride. Question. When you were growing up, who did you see represented as the expert, and how did that shape what you believed was possible? What's people's thoughts?
I like the idea of these safe spaces, but I don't often feel that they should be specifically autistic. Now, that might tie in with what's been said by this poster about, an earlier kind of conditioning or defining help as coming from, the non-autistic, say. But what is lacking for people who are autistic, maybe, or for this particular autistic person, is a space to be and to explore things that aren't generally offered by what's called a neurotypical conditioning. Now, I don't know if having just autistic people in that space would help me. It's something else, it's beyond all these categories, but it's definitely not prevalent in society the way it's run. So it's kind of, a novel space and rare. But all power to her for setting this up, yeah.
Regarding the question of who did you see represented, I can only look back in hindsight, but I do recall people who there was something about them, particularly librarians. And every once in a while, you, I, or maybe all of you, would be recognized by some person. And it felt good, but nobody was talking about it at the time, so we wouldn't have known at that time.
What I like about this post is it makes you think. It makes you think about how society is and how many autistic people feel outside of the society, not being able to fit in terms of getting employment, which was used as an example, but other things as well. It's, the thing about it's that balance of being autistic should be accepted as a difference. But sometimes being autistic, you require help. But then again, anybody to a certain degree needs some sort of help. They don't need saviours, which a lot of people I think are trying to be. But you certainly need help and assistance, which I certainly get from family and friends. And it's to get the positive role models. Someone statistic. Sometimes it might be stereotypical, sometimes maybe not. When I was growing up, I don't know, just looking at the question again. Who did I see you represent as the expert? Well, usually the expert, when I was growing up, it depends what it was talking about. The expert would have been a teacher or a doctor, something along those lines, health worker, or some cases, parents. But it's interesting. It opens up a whole conversation and the visibility thing about feeling visible, about feeling part of society rather being kind of feeling, shunned off it.
I would say my experience is that there are forces that are against this. There are gatekeepers that are against this. In my experience of dealing with professional people, they are not open to the idea of having peers taking any kind of active role. They like the idea of saying that they have taken what we say into account, but they want to control the whole space. They want to be the white saviours, and they use every excuse they can. Robbie has written safeguarding in the text to keep them in the position where they are the people who are helping us. They are not open to enabling organisations like ours to be the people helping other autistic people. Can't turn my mic off.
Yeah, what's an expert anyway? In this context, maybe it means. I had a thought there about what it might mean. Expert. Maybe what Jules just said there about enabling. Although enabling's a shaky word. Facilitating, maybe. I don't know, an expert. I don't think that means someone who knows everything or knows a lot. It might just be someone you trust, perhaps, to seek knowledge or to, be with. I don't know. What do others think?
I was thinking this. I don't think it means, I think the question, but it just could be me reading it my way. Do you know what I mean? When you were growing up, who did you see represented um, as the expert? So I immediately thought of people who were experts in my field of interest when I was a kid. Like maybe they're called nerds or something now, because that's the way I behaved in my autistic portrayal. Not everybody behaves like a nerd, but as a child, I certainly did. I'm a nerd now. So sometimes in school, rather than accelerating me through all the grades, they would take me out of my class, and somebody in the school, like the science teacher or the librarian, would be in charge of occupying a lot of my time. And I think maybe somehow they knew, like they were sort of an expert. But then in the world, I just think they were like the librarians at the big libraries, but this is just me in my world. I don't know. That's what I was thinking they meant. I don't know if that's what they meant. But honestly, a geologist, some of them, it would have been great to be around one of those. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm wondering
Or
if
a
expert.
poet.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm wondering if expert means experienced. And there are different levels of experience. Somebody could be well qualified in a subject and, be the person you go to for information. But are they experienced, as Jimi Hendrix would put it, in what you're feeling or what you need in your life?
It seems to me that this field of autism is so dynamic. It's been changing over the last 5 years, never mind the last 15 or 20 or 40 years. And so there are no experts in autism. There are people with knowledge and expertise and theories. But everything that has been said in the past, now looked at through modern lenses, fails to meet the mark completely. At least 60% of what was previously written about autism is no longer seen as valid. I'm making up numbers, but you get the point.
It took me the whole conversation to get the point. I didn't realize they were talking about experts in autism, but I think they must be. So I'm glad I didn't notice.
Yeah, as Robbie says, all my energy in my childhood was taken coping with being bullied. And Ray's asking, is expert neurotypical? And thinking about the expert thing, I wasn't thinking about an expert in autism. I was just thinking about expert in terms of people in life at the time I was growing up, and that's why I mentioned things like school teachers. And I was thinking people in authority, aside from my parents. Well, I suppose they were an authority as well. It's like, they're the experts because they're the one that's teaching you or advising you about what's right and wrong and just, all different kind of things. And that's the way I took it. I never took it upon as autistic because when I was growing up, like many others, I didn't know I was autistic. I just felt different. It didn't really come to pass how different I was until, I was in adolescence. When I was a, younger child, it just seemed I was just a funny boy in terms of being funny and maybe a class clown, I suppose. But even looking back at it, it didn't feel it was harmful.
But then again, if you were extremely clever, almost like a pleaser, doing well at school, that could get you into a whole heap of trouble with your peers.
Yes,
Yeah,
you're right. It did. I think Robbie pointed out in the chat, you need to spend a lot of your energy to prevent being bullied. And that's why I'm glad some experts in one of the schools I was in where bullying was high, they took me out of class for many, many hours a week. They didn't do it perfectly. I used to get called to the office because they hooked me up with a university in grade 8 grade 7, who would send me literature on science topics. And the other kids knew, so I got bullied.
I was really badly bullied from pretty much the start of school up until I was about 13, 14. And I worked out there was a guy that everyone seemed to like because he was quite witty and funny. So I just said things that were witty and funny, and it did ease off. But there was one bully. It got to a point where I really blew my top, and I nearly hospitalised him. And I came away from that with a suspected fractured cheekbone as well. And I thought he'd leave me alone. And literally 3 weeks later, he slapped me around the face. He walked up to me and slapped me around the face. And the deputy headmaster, who, after I'd, like I say, nearly hospitalised the guy, and I explained to him, because he was like making me out to be the one who'd done something wrong. And I just told him, I've had years from this guy, this. And he said, well, if he ever does it again, just you tell me. And so, of course, after he slapped me around the face 3 weeks later, I just went straight to the deputy head. And the guy got hauled in, and he came up to me and he was screaming at me, why did you do that? Why did you do that? And I said, you don't ever touch me again. And he never did.
You just reminded me that there was a bully when I was in grade 9. And he started following me to the bus. And I was young for grade 9, for one thing, and small and completely shy. But this little friend of mine, he said, he just at some point when it got so intense and we were being followed, he just said, you have to fight. And she pulled me by my kilt down on the ground. So I just punched her really hard. And then I got suspended from school. However, they did talk to me and say I hadn't really done anything wrong, but they had to suspend me. And then I was made to go to the hospital to apologize, but a social worker there told me, also took me aside to say, this person has a track record and you were right. And then, as you know, I didn't speak anymore in high school, anymore at all.
I've said this one before, but my mother taught me to read. And when I got to school, they gave us a Janet and John book. And and I just went straight through it, read straight through it, and went up to the teacher, because I'd started school later than everyone else, and I said, I've read this one, what's next? And she said, really? And she said, well, you can read the book out in front of the class. So I was reading the book out in front of the class. There was one word I got stuck on, and she kept saying, what word is that? What word is that? What word? And just kept going and badgering me, and I was struggling to get it right. And in the end, she told me to go and sit back down at my desk. And I sort of realized from then on not to look like you're better than anyone else or you're doing really well, just blend in.
And you probably weren't trying to do that. You just had finished the book.
Yeah, I mean, bless my mother. Bless my mother. She taught me to read, and that's a positive thing. And you think that would have been sort of thought, well, this is good. I mean, it makes the teacher's job easier, doesn't it?
I was going to say there's a strange powerlessness in the school environment. You know, all the options seem to get you into trouble. So listen, what Teresa was saying there, I was thinking back, you know, like getting expelled would be a good thing. You know what I mean? It's like do something to get yourself out of that environment. But that would get you and your family into a whole heap of trouble and a lot of hassle. And you were made aware of that. And so, you know, what were your options? So you get quite devious and you learn to do very weird things to get through it all. Some of it not so good for you in the long term. But yeah, strange reflections here. Core wounds.
The next post is from Spectrum Coffee, which is a new coffee shop, a good interest company, that's opening up soon, in the next 2 weeks. And I've seen an interview from the person that's, opening this shop. So she's a mother of an autistic child. And it says in a description of what Spectrum Coffee is driven by a passion for coffee and commitment to social change. And it's opening on Saturday, the 31st of January. And it's Unit 19, Vale Lever Industrial Estate, near Dumbarton in Western Barnshire, Scotland. And I can remember the interview through the Loch Lomond TV, which I did, some months ago. And she was talking about this as a way to support and promote autistic people. And that's why I'm sharing it. There's probably more to come from this, but that's why I've shared it. So, yeah.
You know, that's so cool. I don't know if it's to raise funds to support autistic people, but this is I thought, wow, cafes when they first began, because we did not we people in, let's say, Great Britain or whatever, the British Isles, whatever you call it, or like that, didn't have coffee. It came later, but it was a place where intellectuals went to talk. And then I also thought, and these are like totally disconnected, not important thoughts, but some neurodivergent people, coffee helps them. Like my son, coffee helped him with his ADHD. Um, uh, my first thought was, this is amazingly positive, but I don't know why it is.
The grind continues. Maybe GR will give us his anecdote about the Star of Patience and her coffee tastes.
Yeah, it was something like, was it put the coffee in the bottom of the cup, add cold water. No, add cold water and leave a paste in the bottom of the cup, and then pour hot water on top or something. And I've got this. I find if I drink coffee, it just makes me feel drowsy, and that's supposedly not uncommon amongst people with autism.
It's coffee gets me going, to be fair. I don't know where it came from, but yeah, I drink coffee, generally is the normal sort of routine, that word, normal. So I just found it interesting because it was coffee and because it was promoting, autism. And it's local. It's actually quite local to me. Okay, thanks everyone. It's been a great discussion tonight. Get through all the topics as we always do. Thanks everyone's being involved tonight, and thanks for everyone who has shared these posts for us to talk about. Great topics to mull over and to discuss in many different ways. So this is Harry's Facebook for Sunday the 18th of January 2026, which is part of the Spectrum Voices Conversation, which is live every Sunday, 5:55 to 7 p.m. UK time. And I look forward to doing the same next week. So thank you once again, and good night.